Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the next of our Essentials series. These are topical, engaging, and technical webinars on wealth and wellness by leaders in the private client world. I'm Lottie, founder of the Jura Society, the network and private client consultancy focusing on women, wealth, and wellness. Today, we're pleased to welcome Lucy, wealth planner at IPS Capital, to talk all things pensions on divorce. We're going to look at how divorce disproportionately affects women more than men, what you can do about it, and how you'll know whether you have sufficient post-divorce for retirement. So, as always, if you'd like to ask any questions in the chat, we'll have time for Q&A at the end. The session will be recorded, and I am just going to get Lucy in now. Hello, Lucy.
Hi, Lottie. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Lovely. Thank you. Just need to get my slides up. There we go. Right. So, as Lottie said in the intro, talking all things divorce today, pensions on divorce, and why it affects women more than it affects men. So, to start off, there's two main reasons. The first reason is the gender pay gap. Which already exists and has existed for many years, and unfortunately it's not narrowing. So obviously if women are paid less, it means that they are contributing less to their pensions on an affordability basis, and also if they're receiving employer contributions, it means that they are at a lower level. That means that their women's pensions tend to be growing at a smaller pace than the equivalent men's pensions. And the second main reason, obviously, is career breaks and family commitments. Often in a marriage, the female will take more career breaks, having children, or other family commitments such as elderly parents. So that means they either stop work and stop receiving employer contributions, or they go part-time or reduce their hours. Both of those things affect pensions. So the graph below, this is from a sort of House of Commons report, recent report, and it shows, a little bit hard to see there, but basically the purple bottom line shows female pension, median pension wealth at normal pension age, and the top line shows men, and it goes from 2006 to this goes to 2020, but it's a very similar picture today. And the little dotted line where it goes a little bit funny in the middle, that was from the introduction of auto-enrollment. So that meant that a lot more women were brought into the statistics, but they were at lower levels. So often, they perhaps weren't contributing to a pension before, but they were brought into the pension landscape through auto-enrollment. But it meant that the scale of those pension contributions and the build-up of that pension was at a much lower level than men when you take it on a median basis. So overall, the current pension gap is about 35% between men and women, and that is the same today as it was a few years ago. Just skipped ahead there. So what happens in divorce? So already we've got this gender disparity between men and female. So in divorce, first of all, about half of divorcing couples pension wealth is held by one partner, which is usually the husband. That's from stats taken from Pensions Age in January this year, so recent statistics. Two, when dealing with pensions on divorce, pensions often remain overlooked, especially for those attempting DIY divorces. Often the female is more interested in retaining the family home. Not a criticism, it's quite understandable, but sometimes that's not the best outcome for them. But they opt to keep the family home, and they forego, or they don't even bother trying to claim any of the pension. So that has a big impact on females. Third point is, circa 90% of divorces do not include the pension. That sort of goes back to that point. And the final point is that between 1.8 billion and 4 billion a year of pension monies are not being split. That was a stat in a recent article by a journalist called Sam Down. She looks into a lot of areas of pensions and how women are affected on divorce. And they're obviously huge sums of money. That's money every year that women are not claiming, even though they might be entitled to it, perhaps they've been married for many years, and they have contributed to that overall wealth of the family. So just to quickly talk about pensions themselves, as you might already know, not all pensions are equal. Different pension types, and it's really important to understand those different types. So obviously there's the defined contribution, defined benefit, and then there's those public sector sort of pensions. A common mistake is to agree a split based solely on the value of the pension rather than taking into account the level of income. So perhaps some house, we could offset those. But actual fact, that might not, the value of the pension might not be a true value. So with a defined contribution, it often is the value of the underlying funds, so whatever that might be invested in. And in recent years, markets have done well if you've been invested in, say, a global diversified fund. So over the past year, for example, the FTSE World has returned about 23%, I think. So the valuations of defined contributions are doing well recently. But the thing to take note of there is that even defined contribution pensions might have hidden benefits. So there might be something to do with the plan, especially perhaps slightly older plans, where there are some guarantees. So either guarantee of value at retirement or guarantee of income at retirement. So somebody might come along again with a valuation, but that's not the true valuation at retirement. And often providers, unfortunately, don't readily provide that information. It's the sort of information that you have to go specifically to a provider and say, are there any guarantees? Are there any benefits that would be lost? And then they will tell you. But unless you ask the right questions, you might not find that out. And then we come on to defined benefits. So obviously these are the sort of gold-plated pensions, and often it's probably people, I'd say, over the age of 50 that might have a defined benefit pension, deferred pension. Having said that, I'm 47, and I do have one. It wasn't from my first job; it was from my second job back in the early 2000s. So I am a deferred member of a defined benefit. So people can be slightly younger, but it tends to be those aged 50 plus. And with defined benefit pensions in divorce, the value it's called the cash equivalent value or the cash equivalent transfer value. And a pension sharing order will they will split the pension. It's often, if you do pension sharing, that is a clean break, and they will give the receiving spouse a percentage of the pension. So what is important in this case is the value of the cash equivalent value. So it's not the income, not the guaranteed income that somebody would actually get in retirement, is what we call the cash equivalent value. And that is based on the sort of what the estimated benefits would cost, based on longevity, current age of the member, growth rates, gilt rates. So an actuary will calculate that cash equivalent value. And finally, I've just put there just to add on about the McLeod remedy. So that is just for public service pension schemes. Not everybody is affected. Again, it's people that were probably members of the scheme pre-2015. Public service pension schemes are what classed as sort of pay as you go. So you can't transfer out. In that case, it's not a case of here's a lump sum, go off and do something with it. In that case, it's very much you remain a member of the scheme in your own right if you're the receiving spouse. And there is a McLeod remedy for those people that can claim that or eligible for that, but they tend to have been a member since pre-2015. Again, it's just something to look out for if those sort of pensions are involved. So talking of cash equivalent values, again, here's a little chart provided by XPS Pensions Group as at the 31st of May 2014. And basically, like I say, it's probably very hard to see, but there's dates along the bottom. It goes from May 2018 to May 2024. I might not have said that earlier, May 2024. And above the side, there's cash values. But basically, it shows the lump sum pension of an average male, age 64, who would receive £10,000 a year in retirement. And as you can see, the cash equivalent value, the transfer value, they were really high at one point, and they have been steadily dropping since around 2014. So at the start of this chart, they're much higher than they are in the current day. You can see around that big drop down, that's sort of 2022, and that dip right at the bottom there, that is September 2022, following the mini budget by trust. So they are affected by what's happening in the economic environment, as well as all those other factors. And why is it important that that these figures are dropping? So if you're sharing a pension, you'll get a percentage, be awarded a percentage under a pension sharing order of the value. But if the values are dropping, then that can have a huge impact. That can have a huge impact, sorry, lost my point there. That can have a huge impact because a lot of the time pensions you can't keep within the scheme, and that's growing more and more common now. A scheme will say if you're under a pension sharing order, you have to take your lump sum and put it somewhere else into another personal pension. So if the cash equivalent values are dropping and you get a percentage of that, the value of that will have dropped. And that means that for those people that are looking to get equality of income, they may need to be awarded a higher share of the pension in order to get that equality of income. And that's all based on, it's often different if there's big age gaps between couples, or it also depends on whether majority of the pension was built up pre-marriage. There's things that are taken into account within that percentage. But if you go away and with a pot, you want to go away with the maximum that you can. And unfortunately, those values are currently dropping. And that affects women more than men. If we go back to the original sort of slide, where it says in over half of couples, 90% of the pension wealth is held by the male of the couple, if by the husband, then that means that these lowering cash equivalent values are really affecting the female part of the couple, and which is another reason why women are being disproportionately affected by pensions on divorce. So that leads me on to how much do you need in a pension? That's a sort of slightly million-dollar question that everybody wants to know. And it does obviously depend on individual circumstances. Everybody has different needs and objectives in terms of what they need to live off in retirement. And it's difficult, obviously, also to say because we don't know what's going to happen in the next 10, 20 years. Inflation has a big impact on how far your money will go. But what we can do is we can do modelling, what we call cash flow modelling, and that can map out potentially what you might need in retirement based on your current level of expenditure and your expected expenditure going forwards. So it's a really useful exercise to do with a financial advisor or somebody else in the field, financial coach, to think about what you would potentially need in retirement and also why you might need it. Some things you might currently spend on, but you think actually going forwards we won't need that. So if people want sort of ballpark figures, a sort of good starting point, well, they have been provided by the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association. It's what they call retirement living standards. So what they've done is they've compiled a sort of basket of sort of common goods and services that they think somebody in retirement would need, and it's based on a sort of minimum, moderate and comfortable level of standard of living. So obviously a minimum is purely the bare minimum. I think it's based on sort of one UK holiday a year, eating out once a month. I should also point out that living expenses are not included in these figures. The Pensions and Lifetime Saving Association have assumed that most people reaching retirement age have either finished paying off their mortgage, they're not in rented accommodation, so no rent or mortgage payments are included in these figures. So if people are still paying for accommodation, either ongoing mortgages, which the rates are going on older and older these days, or rent, then that would be on top of these figures. So let me just have a look what a moderate would be. That includes one foreign holiday a year, and eating out a few times with a small car, so replaced every 7 years. And the comfortable level, a standard of living is, a bit more freedom, a few more luxuries, including one foreign holiday and several UK mini breaks during the year, streaming TV and internet service, and a sort of small car replaced every 5 years. So they're the sort of 3 levels of standard of living that they've given. And their research shows that 51% of people, they focus on their current needs and wants rather than saving for retirement. But those figures, they're quite substantial, especially if you want the moderate or comfortable standard of living. And I should also point out that this is for a single person. The figures are obviously higher again for couples. So it's a good thing to think that's what you need every single year to enjoy a certain level of income. And that's actually expenditure. So also the other thing you've got to think about is if you're getting income in from various sources, if you're getting pension income, that is received PAYE, so it's taxed at source. So you'll obviously get less, you'll get the net amount, you won't get that gross amount. So you've got to sort of scale up for that. And other sort of investment income is taxed differently. So you've got to think about the taxation of different sources of income and what your final net figure would be and whether you'd be able to afford that sort of level of annual income. And just taking that top figure of 43,000 there, 100, based on a sort of average person aged 60. If you needed a lump sum that could provide that level of income each year, that lump sum would be around 750,000. So that is a big lump sum that you need to be able to afford a comfortable level of living throughout retirement. And we also need to highlight there, again, for women, we tend to have longer life expectancy. So that means potentially more years of retirement that need to be funded. So again, females, they have a lower pension pot, lower pension wealth on general, but they need to fund more years in retirement. So that's also why women are affected by this sort of figures. So just coming into summary overall, pensions are a really important part of financial planning. They're a very tax efficient way of building a pension pot for retirement. And also currently they have advantages in terms of inheritance tax planning because they are inheritance tax free vehicles under current rules. Pension should always be taken into account in divorce proceedings. They're often one of the most valuable assets a couple owns after their family home. And whilst a female, may wish to keep the family home, often, if you talk to clients a sort of year or 2 years after their divorce, when everything's settled and it's sort of a slightly distant memory, if they have moved during that period and they hadn't wanted to at the time, they will often say they're glad that they did. That initial sort of vulnerability and wanting that stability, that was very much an immediate short-term need, but actually, moving and sharing the pension, that sort of meets a long-term need. And actually, 1 or 2 years later, most women will say that they're glad they made that move and made that decision. Make sure you understand the pensions owned by both parties in divorce. That's really important. Again, the different types of pensions and what the potential income in retirement is. Often, if there are complex pensions involved, you will need an actuarial report and potentially need a sort of financial advisor or somebody to sort of help translate those figures, help you understand what it is you'll actually be getting and what that could provide in the future. Post-divorce, it's really important to continue building pension provisions, obviously depending on age. But if there is that possibility to continue building pension, either personal or employer pension contributions, then that is really important. Remember, even if not working, you can contribute 3,600 gross per annum, and that does benefit from compounding growth. So, you might sometimes people think, oh, it's such a small amount, but it can benefit from compounding, and over 10, 20 years, that can make all the difference. And the final point is just don't forget the state pension. Check your state pension forecast and NI record to see if you can benefit from topping up. Again, there's an affordability issue, and there is, it's worth seeing whether it would be beneficial for you. But due to campaigning from Martin Lewis, a money saving expert, the timeline that you've got has been extended. So previously you could only go back for the last 6 years, but due to the pension changes and then there's some recent campaigning, the deadline has been extended to April 2025. So you can go back throughout your record and see after that date you'll only be able to top up for the last 6 years. And the final point on that state pension point is just to remember that if you do have children under the age of 12, or you do have children under 12 and you are eligible for child benefit, even if you weren't claiming the monetary value, if you're registered for child benefit, then you do get NI credits for that period. So sometimes clients say, oh, well, I've not been working, so I won't have any sort of record. Well, if you've been doing childcare, if you've been the sort of sole responsible at home, then you will get those NI credits for those years that you haven't been working. Again, that can be very valuable. And I think that's it. I think the main thing is that it is hard to understand. Pensions can be complex. It's a very difficult situation often for people going through divorce. They can feel very vulnerable. Women in particular, as I said, can be disproportionately affected by divorce from a wealth angle, and also from a sort of emotional angle. So it's really important to get somebody to talk to, whoever that might be. There's a good argument for sort of getting a team of people these days, depending on their expertise and what you require. I feel like I've done an awful lot of talking now, Lottie.
Oh, I love that, Lucy. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, I'm getting reverb on it, but never mind. That was brilliant. Such a comprehensive.
Sorry, I feel like I sort of rattled through it a little bit, but a lot of information to get out there.
Absolutely brilliant. So I just want to really heighten that point of how important it is to continue making contributions to pensions, but also during the marriage, before things, turn sour. If you are not working, it is possible, isn't it, for a husband to actually contribute to the wife?
Yes. So there are 3,600. Anybody can do that, and that also applies to children. Actually, often, I know for a lot of people, it feels like it's many years away, and they think, oh, is it worth doing it? But those small amounts really do compound and make a difference. So yeah, if you're not working, you've got children, so anybody can make those contributions of that 3,600 gross, and obviously that's a different net amount you have to pay in, and everybody then benefits from that tax relief uplift. So it is definitely worth doing.
Yeah, and a brilliant potential, like a christening gift or something like that. I think something that you're just going to pop away, and then when they get older, oh, it's brilliant. Another thing that I think is really important to consider.
Yes, I've already started your pension saving for you.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to need to. With the state of everything. Sorry. Oh, we've got a lag. Great. Hang on. Pause. Catch up. Are we on there? Present and future needs. I think that's where clients, particularly when they're going through divorce, can get tangled up because they are in reactive stress crisis mode, and it's really hard for them to think about moving away from family home or all of these things. So it is good to have a runway of what considerations are immediate and what are going to benefit you in the long term as well. And that's where speaking with a professional can really help you to make these informed decisions sensibly and realistically as well, and taking into consideration tax and economic and investment factors, especially when you're looking at things like pensions as well. What's the the net benefit of selling the family home versus getting a share of the pension? What might that look like overall? One thing I think would be interesting to talk about is actually the process of dividing up these pensions, because it's not always straightforward, is it?
No, it's not. And often, the problem is that often the whole process is very long, drawn out process, as everybody going through divorce knows. So there is sometimes that time lag. Sometimes, the original sort of calculations, both for a DB, defined benefit contribution, and defined benefit pension and a defined contribution pension. If all the calculations are done and then 1 year later the process is still going on, those valuations can be very different. So it is a very drawn out process. That's why you do need professionals sort of on board that do understand that divorce process. And the other point there, which is a good point, is also, so it's really, everybody understands how difficult divorce is, and it is very stressful and difficult to make those clear decisions. So actually getting professionals on board right at the beginning is really important. And often people think, oh, I'm paying out for a cost for this and there's a cost for that. But actually, in the long run, it's really beneficial to get that advice, and it can, save people a lot of money, and it can also be, hugely beneficial going forwards if they end up with that pension share, which is really important in their retirement. So yes, it is a long drawn out process. There's obviously, it depends, there's obviously a push not to end up in court, a sort of non-court resolution, and I think more and more people obviously are promoting, no solicitor really wants their client to end up in court. So if it can be agreed out of court, obviously that's the better solution. But there is a long drawn out process, often, even if it starts with sort of mediation and goes from there. And that's where the professionals can really help and hopefully speed up the process. In terms of times, it also, is very dependent on providers. And they also have long time scales. You ask for information and they say, oh, I'll come back in, something ridiculous, 45 days. And that doesn't help. If you're waiting for an actuarial report, again, the actuarial report, they might be able to say, oh, we turn it around within 3 weeks once we've received the information. And getting that information can take an awful long time. So there are a lot of stop-starting in the process, which can be very frustrating for clients. But everybody's sort of slightly beholden to providers to get that information.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that, that just spells out exactly why having the right team around you to support you emotionally, financially, and legally is key for anyone going, whether it is separation, whether it is divorce, whether it is even bereavement, or anything where you are facing uncharted territory, where you don't understand what the system is, and there's lots of bureaucracy and there's lots of administration as well. It's having somebody to guide you through that process will just help to lessen some of the stresses that you can then focus on actually what you want to be achieving with your life, rather than being bogged down with admin, which nobody actually, I think, enjoys, which is why you pay people to do it for you.
There's far too much life admin just in general these days. So,
yeah, I completely agree. Before we close, do you want to give us sort of like your top tips for anybody who is facing divorce to, with their finances?
Yeah, I think it is. I think knowledge is key. So it is that sort of exercise of making sure you really understand all the assets, all the liabilities, everything going on. Often in any sort of, marriage couple, one person takes the lead on the finances, and that's just a practical thing, isn't it? It's not worth both of you both doing the same thing. So one person tends to know slightly more than the other, and that sort of puts them at an advantage if people are separating. So the person that has less knowledge, it's really important for them to sort of arm themselves with that knowledge so they can make any decisions. The other thing is, I think, to start early. I think there's obviously, as we've all said, we completely appreciate the situation is very difficult, but don't do that sort of bury your head in the sand sort of approach to it, because nothing ever in life gets better with that approach. Try and be proactive, and try and start getting organised early on, and that way that sort of leads into the sort of being knowledgeable, as knowledge is power. And I think the other thing is think that it's really easy to say all positive thinking, but you have to think about what the outcome is and why you're doing it and what you're trying to achieve. And again, people sometimes need an external person to help with that, to help them understand what they're aiming for and why they're doing things and what they might need. But also always keep a sort of eye on that sort of end goal, that the aim is to sort of have that financial freedom post separation, post divorce, and then to sort of be able to go off with the knowledge you've got and with the sort of the plan that you've got, and be able to lead, it's a bit of a catchphrase, but lead your own rich life, not on the numbers, but doing the things you want to do, doing the things you enjoy, spending time with the people you enjoy. That's the sort of end goal, and to keep that in sight during what is a difficult process.
Oh, brilliant. Yes, thank you, Lucy. And thank you to everybody who has tuned in to watch us live, and anybody who's watching us on the recordings. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and Lucy or anybody will be able to support you with your questions. But yeah, that's all for now. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.